She welcomed him aboard and never let him land. Welcome to Warm Leaves. I am your host, Raven. Tell me where you're tuning in from. Your voices keep these mysteries alive. Now, let's take off into the truth. Rain lashed the tarmac outside Heathrow Airport as passengers trickled off British Continental Flight 412 from Marrakesh. They were weary from turbulence and delays, eyes bleary with fatigue. Their coats clutched tightly as they emerged from the plane and into the chill of an English autumn morning. Amid the subdued murmur of disembarkation, no one seemed to notice the absence of Seat 3A's passenger until it was too late. By the time the airline staff realized he hadn't passed through immigration, the aircraft had already been cleaned, refueled, and prepped for its next journey. His name was Mr. Felix Oxley, a mid-tier investment consultant from Brighton with a spotless record, a passport stamped precisely every quarter, and a habit of traveling light. His luggage, a single carry-on, had been found overhead, untouched. His boarding pass was recorded. His ID verified at check-in, yet he was nowhere. No one had seen him leave the aircraft. An air hostess, young and polished in her navy uniform, had checked his ticket with a pleasant smile at boarding. She remembered him vaguely. He'd asked for water, declined the meal, and read most of the way. Then, nothing. No one else among the crew could recall anything unusual. He had simply vanished. By midday, the airline security team had reviewed every frame of CCTV footage from the jet bridge and terminal. Felix Oxley was seen boarding, but not leaving. The final manifest was correct. No stowaways, no mix-ups. Even the toilet logs, tracked digitally in modern aircraft, showed nothing untoward. He hadn't been found in the lavatory, nor in any storage compartments. A thorough inspection of the aircraft revealed nothing. It was as if he had ceased to exist between cloud and runway. 2 days later, the case reached the quiet village of St. Mary Mead. A cousin of Felix's, Agatha Lumley, a retired Latin teacher, had grown frantic and penned a distressed letter to her old friend, Miss Jane Marple, detailing the impossible disappearance. Though her days of long journeys were behind her, Miss Marple's mind was as sharp as ever. She found the whole affair not only concerning but faintly familiar in its peculiarity. "I always say," Miss Marple mused to herself over her knitting, "people think air travel makes crime more complicated. But the human element remains quite the same. Greed, deception, desperation, they don't change with altitude." She sent a telegram to Agatha. "Coming tomorrow. Have tea ready." Upon arrival in London, Miss Marple secured a meeting with the lead investigator, a polite but overwhelmed Detective Inspector Nash. He had little to offer. No signs of foul play, no ransom demands, no indication of suicide. Felix Oxley had simply boarded a plane and vanished, somewhere between seat 3A and the arrival gate. "Most peculiar," said Miss Marple, sitting primly in the Scotland Yard briefing room. "May I see the passenger manifest?" Nash handed her a copy, bemused. "We've interviewed everyone. No one saw him leave. The seat next to him was empty. No reports of unusual behavior. And the crew? All accounted for. No criminal records. Excellent service histories." She tapped a name on the list. "Cynthia Blake, the air hostess who served the first-class cabin." "Yes. Friendly. Professional. Been with the airline 5 years. Miss Marple said, folding the manifest neatly. "I'd like to meet her." Cynthia was radiant in person, poised, articulate, and visibly unnerved by the ongoing investigation. "I swear he was there at takeoff," she insisted, sipping a lukewarm coffee in the crew lounge. "Seat 3A, he had a leather satchel and a green sweater. He asked for water just before we hit turbulence over the Bay of Biscay. I gave it to him. After that, I suppose I didn't see him again." "No small talk?" Miss Marple asked gently. "No nervousness?" A man who travels often should be rather blasé about flying. Cynthia hesitated. He did seem reserved, kept checking his watch, and he did make a call before takeoff. Asked me if we had in-flight Wi-Fi. We don't, not on that model. Odd, Miss Marple murmured. If he had important business, why choose a flight without connectivity? Later that afternoon, Miss Marple persuaded Nash to revisit the aircraft with her. She examined every corner of the cabin, paying special attention to the first-class section. Then she stood silently at seat 3A, as though listening to a memory. Her eyes fell on the emergency panel just behind the seat, a small maintenance compartment meant only for technical crews. "May I?" she asked, and Nash nodded. Inside was only wiring, no signs of tampering, and yet the idea had taken root in her mind. Back at the hotel, she asked for a list of passengers seated within 2 rows of 3A. Most were business travelers, solitary, nondescript, efficient. One name, however, stood out: Mrs. Laurel Edgecombe, traveling on a newly issued passport. She was 45, unremarkable in appearance, and claimed to be returning from a yoga retreat. No checked luggage, just one handbag. She was seated in 4C, Nash confirmed, opposite side of the aisle. She wore a scarf, did she not? Miss Marple asked, smiling faintly. Not sure. Why? I suspect she did. Miss Marple asked to see the security footage again. Frame by frame, she and Nash reviewed the arrival camera for Flight 412. And there she was, Mrs. Edgecombe, walking steadily, scarf drawn high around her neck, sunglasses too large for the early morning light. Does she resemble Mr. Oxley? Nash asked, frowning. Hard to say under all that, but enough height, same build. If one were to obscure key features and keep their head down, one might pass unnoticed. You think he disguised himself? No, Miss Marple said quietly. I think someone else used his documents to exit the aircraft, and I think Mr. Oxley never left the plane at all. That evening, they brought Cynthia Blake in again. I beg your pardon, Miss Marple said gently, but I believe you knew Felix Oxley before the flight. Cynthia paled. He was just another passenger. Strange, then, that you remembered so many details about him when most crew could not recall his face. And stranger still that you didn't see him again after the drink service, despite being assigned to his section. What are you saying? Miss Marple leaned forward. I believe you lured him to the rear galley during turbulence. Perhaps he thought it a rendezvous. Or perhaps you asked for his help with something trivial. Either way, I believe he never returned to his seat. I believe you incapacitated him, perhaps even killed him, and stowed his body in one of the catering trolleys. Then, before landing, you exited the plane disguised as Mrs. Edgecombe, using documents taken from Felix's briefcase. You were seated next to the lavatories, correct? A convenient location for changing clothes unseen. Detective Nash opened a folder. We did find something odd. A catering trolley from that flight was sent to the wrong storage facility. When we recovered it this morning, it contained a bloodied belt and Oxley's monogrammed handkerchief. Cynthia didn't speak. She simply began to cry. I suppose the motive will turn out to be money, Miss Marple said softly. Perhaps they were lovers. Or perhaps she was desperate and he had something she needed. Access, identity, inheritance. In the end, it was all quite tragically simple. Cynthia had known Felix from years before. She had fallen into debt. He had refused to help. She'd planned for weeks, crafting a second identity, forging the passport, altering her appearance, the perfect vanishing act. And it might have worked, had she not overlooked one thing, that a kind, elderly lady in St. Mary Mead read more than murder mysteries. She read people. Detective Inspector Nash sat at his desk the following morning, nursing a cup of lukewarm tea and a knot of unease that hadn't loosened since Cynthia Blake's tearful confession the night before. There was no body, no clear evidence of murder beyond a bloodied belt and circumstantial testimony. Cynthia had since retracted her breakdown, claiming confusion and stress, and her solicitor now refused any further questioning. Without a corpse, the Crown Prosecution Service would be cautious. Nash knew that much. Miss Marple, however, appeared wholly untroubled by the legal stalemates. She sat across from him, gloves neatly folded in her lap, the edge of her hat casting a soft shadow over her eyes. "She's lying, of course," she said, almost mildly. "But not entirely. She didn't act alone." Nash blinked. "You're suggesting an accomplice?" Miss Marple offered a faint smile. "I'm suggesting a story far more layered than a jealous woman and a faked passport. You see, murder is never just murder. It is concealment of something worse." He frowned. "You think Felix Oxley was hiding something?" I think he had something. Something someone else wanted." Before Nash could speak, there was a brisk knock at the door. A junior constable appeared, slightly breathless. "Sir, the catering team at LHR, Heathrow, just sent this in. Found it during their shift rotation. Thought it might be relevant." He placed a clear evidence bag on the desk. Inside was a slim black thumb drive. Miss Marple leaned forward, eyes narrowing. Nash unsealed the bag and plugged the device into his laptop. There were only 2 files. One was a PDF titled Client Master Index. The other was a single video clip, time-stamped 2 days before the flight. Nash opened the PDF first and let out a long breath. It was a spreadsheet, hundreds of names, account numbers, transactions, many flagged in red. Offshore banking routes, shadow companies. The name Felix Oxley appeared at the top, listed as consultant, risk redundancy clearance. Miss Marple read over his shoulder, her expression unchanged. "Now we know. He wasn't just an investment consultant, he was a cleaner, the sort who launders not floors, but fortunes." Nash opened the video file next. A grainy security feed, likely from a hotel corridor. A man, Felix, was seen exiting a room. Behind him, barely visible in the shadows, was a woman. Long coat, dark glasses, hair tucked under a flight cap. Miss Marple's eyes gleamed. And there she is. Not Cynthia Blake, but someone else. Nash sat back. "Then Cynthia didn't kill him." "Oh, she may still have played a part," Miss Marple said, folding her hands. "But that woman, she's the key, and we've not yet found her." They returned to the flight manifest. Names were cross-checked again, but nothing stood out. Every passenger had cleared customs, every passport scanned. No duplicates, no anomalies. The woman from the footage didn't match any travel records, unless she never traveled under her own name. Miss Marple stared at the manifest a long moment. Then her fingers tapped gently beside one name. "Richard Melling, seat 3C. "A quiet man, yes?" she asked. Nash checked the notes. No interactions reported. Didn't order a meal. Read a newspaper most of the flight. Disembarked alone. "I wonder," Miss Marple murmured. "Did anyone actually see Mr. Melling board, or speak to him?" The check-in footage was retrieved again and carefully analyzed. Richard Melling was seen briefly, tall, balding, wearing a tan coat. But the timestamp showed something odd. His scan-in occurred a full 30 minutes after the gate had closed. "He was let through. Late?" Nash asked aloud. The operations log confirmed that a technical override had granted Melling clearance. The override had been issued by Cynthia Blake. "And who verified the override?" Miss Marple asked. The system did not say. But the timestamp coincided with a curious absence in Cynthia's recorded activity. A 15-minute gap when she had no logged movements, no cart service, and no cabin walkthroughs. "That may be when she was with Mr. Oxley," Miss Marple said softly. "And our mystery woman used the same gap to assume another's identity. So the woman in the hallway, she killed Felix and used Melling's papers to leave the plane." "Precisely. Or she forced him to switch identities, perhaps under duress." The real Melling might never have stepped aboard. Or he did, and didn't leave. Nash stood, suddenly filled with renewed purpose. We'll need to find out who scanned the documents. If Melling was replaced, someone had to miss it. Miss Marple nodded. And you must also search the service compartments again. If she switched clothes, she'd need to dispose of the uniform, and the real Cynthia Blake was never seen leaving after the flight landed. Nash blinked. You mean? I mean, she said gently, the woman you interviewed may not have been Cynthia at all. And just like that, the tangled threads unraveled further. Cynthia Blake, the one arrested, had worn a uniform that hadn't been logged into the airline system. Her ID had scanned correctly, but the photograph was an older model, grainy and easily forged. Her fingerprints, now returned from the lab, matched no known records. Even her home address in Croydon turned out to be a recently vacated rental, paid for in cash. 2 women, Miss Marple said, as the rain returned to tap softly at the windows. Both air hostesses. One real, one fake. One dead, one vanished. And a man caught between their war. It was past midnight when Nash's team returned from their second inspection of the aircraft. Tucked deep behind an insulated panel in the galley, wedged between coolant pipes, they found a small bundle of fabric. A Navy stewardess uniform, blood-stained, torn. A set of initials were embroidered inside the collar. CB. The real Cynthia Blake had never left Flight 412 alive, but someone else had, wearing her face. Morning light filtered through the fog curling along the Thames, casting a pale glow over Scotland Yard's interview suite. Detective Inspector Nash stood behind the 2-way mirror, arms crossed, eyes narrowed. Inside, a man in a crisp grey blazer sat motionless, legs crossed neatly. He looked ordinary, bookish, tired, but Nash's gut said otherwise. "That's Richard Melling," said the officer beside him. "At least the man traveling under his name. Customs verified the ID. His face matches the passport photo. But after what Miss Marple said..." Nash nodded grimly. "He's either lying or he's not Richard Melling at all." The interview began cordially. Melling, or the man claiming to be him, answered questions with the clipped precision of someone well practiced in the art of saying just enough. "I boarded at Marrakesh as scheduled," he said, voice even. "I had a connecting flight to Manchester, but I was delayed at immigration. I didn't notice anything unusual on board." "You were seated 2 rows behind Felix Oxley." Melling tilted his head as though recalling. "I may have been. I don't tend to speak with other passengers. He didn't seem memorable." "And Cynthia Blake?" Nash asked. "Did she serve you during the flight?" "I suppose she did. Tea, maybe. I couldn't say for sure. They all look the same in uniform, don't they?" The corner of Miss Marple's mouth twitched slightly as she observed through the glass. Nash leaned in. "Did you notice any commotion during the flight? Anyone moving about when they shouldn't have?" "No," Melling said after a pause. "Nothing that seemed out of the ordinary." Yet his voice had stiffened just slightly. A pause. A mental edit. Miss Marple, in the adjacent room, sipped her tea quietly. "He's rehearsed, but not to lie completely. He's practiced avoidance, minimizing memory, obscuring specifics. It suggests he's hiding something, but perhaps not everything." While Melling was held under observation, the team moved on to the next interview. Mrs. Laurel Edgecombe, who had been seated diagonally from Felix in 4C. She arrived in a velvet shawl and sunglasses, though inside she removed both to reveal a nervous, twitching expression. "I didn't see much," she began. "I get airsick, you see, and I kept my eyes shut for most of the flight. Awful turbulence. I'm not good with motion." Nash made notes, eyes flicking up. "Did you notice the man in 3A, Felix Oxley?" "Oh, yes, now that you say. He was reading. Quiet, never spoke. I remember because I spilled a bit of ginger ale and was terribly embarrassed. He didn't even react." "That's interesting. Nash said, pen pausing. According to flight logs, you ordered only water. She blinked. Oh, did I? Perhaps I meant another flight. Have you flown recently? Mrs. Edgecombe hesitated. I took the train down from York a few weeks ago. Perhaps I'm misremembering. Nash gently shifted forward. Say, Mrs. Edgecombe, your passport was issued 3 days before the flight. The address on your customs form no longer exists. It's a condemned building. She opened her mouth, closed it again. Did someone give you those documents, Mrs. Edgecombe? Nash asked softly. Tears welled in her eyes. I didn't know it was a crime. A woman approached me at the Marrakesh airport, said she worked for the airline, said she needed help staging a social experiment for flight safety, offered me money to act as another passenger, said it was for training. She gave me the name Laurel Edgecombe. She even provided the handbag. Do you know where she went after the flight landed? Mrs. Edgecombe shook her head, trembling. She told me to keep my head down, act nervous, avoid security, that it would all be over in an hour. And you never saw her again? She said someone would contact me. No one did. Miss Marple stepped into the room once the woman was escorted out. That was fear, she said quietly. Not guilt. She was used, a decoy. The real conspirator wanted the customs agents distracted by a false flag. An obvious imposter, someone bound to be caught eventually. Meanwhile, she slipped through dressed in something far more ordinary. Back at Heathrow, Nash's team re-examined the post-flight terminal footage. As they scrubbed through frame by frame, something curious emerged. At 7:42, 10 minutes after disembarkation began, a woman in an airline maintenance jumpsuit exited through a side corridor marked Authorized Personnel Only. She wore a high-visibility vest, a bulky headset, and carried a wheeled toolbox. She was never stopped. The airport's systems showed no work order for that gate at the time. She's our ghost, Nash murmured. She left in disguise. Not as a passenger, not as crew, as support staff. She knew the system, knew which cameras to avoid, knew how to use a distraction to make her move. The trail, cold for days, was warming. Back at the yard, another interview was underway, this time with one of the ground technicians who had serviced Flight 412. I didn't notice anything odd, he said, scratching his neck. Except, there was a new girl. Said she was transferred from Gatwick. Maintenance crew rotation. Dark hair, bit of an accent. Didn't talk much. Miss Marple's voice, when she spoke, was soft but firm. Do you remember her name? He shook his head. Didn't give one, but she had clearance. Badge and all. Yellow lanyard. Nash turned sharply. There were no transfers logged from Gatwick that day. Exactly, said Miss Marple. She had 2 disguises. First as crew to commit the murder, then as maintenance to escape unnoticed. Nash paced, the puzzle now fitting together with grim clarity. So we've confirmed that. The real Cynthia Blake was killed. Her uniform used by an imposter. The imposter then changed clothes, posed as a ground tech, and left during the confusion of disembarkation. And in the middle, Miss Marple added, a frightened woman used as a decoy. And a man, Melling, who may have helped or been coerced. Nash paused. You think he's in on it? Perhaps unwillingly, perhaps not at all, but I think the woman, whoever she is, had help. One person couldn't orchestrate this alone. Melling's silence could mean he recognized her. And then, just as Nash reached for his next folder, a constable knocked at the door, face pale. Sir, he said, a message just came in from Marrakesh. Local police found a body in an abandoned hotel room near the airport. Male, British passport, multiple stab wounds. ID matches, Richard Melling, silence settled over the room like a drawn curtain. Miss Marple's eyes darkened. "Then the man we interviewed is not Richard Melling." Nash swore under his breath. "He was the inside man, the impostor." Miss Marple rose from her chair, her voice low but certain. "And now we must catch a killer who has no name, no face, and no trace, except for the voices she left behind, telling just enough truth to keep her hidden." The silence in Nash's office was thick with revelation. The man they had just interviewed, cool, measured, forgettable, was not Richard Melling. The real Melling lay dead in a Marrakesh hotel room, his body already in the first stages of decomposition. The false Melling had vanished as easily as he'd appeared, leaving behind only a faint whiff of cologne and a slowly cooling chair. Miss Marple stood at the window, gazing out over the city's skyline as if the answer might be written in the clouds. "It's always the middlemen," she murmured. "They're the ones who slip through because they don't look like villains. They're invisible by design." Nash was already pulling files. "Let's revisit everyone. We need to redraw the entire web, connections, motives, inconsistencies. Somewhere in this mess is the answer." The whiteboard in the briefing room slowly began to fill. Felix Oxley, financial consultant, but not the kind who balanced books. He cleaned them, laundering money through offshore accounts, rerouting assets, obscuring trails. His thumb drive had revealed links to over a dozen illicit funds, several of them now frozen thanks to the information recovered. A man like that didn't vanish by chance. He was eliminated, surgically. Cynthia Blake, real stewardess, loyal, professional, dead. Her uniform and identity stolen, likely aboard the plane itself. Cause of death presumed to be blunt trauma, but no body yet confirmed. Was she chosen at random, or did the imposter know her? The imposter, female, possibly early 30s, dark-haired, fluent in airline protocols, skilled in disguise. Had used at least 3 different identities: Cynthia Blake, Laurel Edgecombe, and a Heathrow ground technician. Escaped the airport undetected. Presumed to have accomplices. Possibly trained. Possibly ex-military or intelligence. Fake Richard Melling, a plant. Used the identity of a murdered man to board the flight, helped obscure the imposter's movement, and possibly handled the physical act of killing Felix. His real identity remained unknown. Passport was expertly forged, now vanished. Laurel Edgecombe, dupe, used as a distraction, provided with false documents and instructed to behave suspiciously. Her fear appeared genuine. Motive, money and naivety. Miss Marple studied the connections. "It's all rather convenient, isn't it?" she said softly. "We've assumed Felix was the target because he vanished. But what if he wasn't the only one? What if this was about something he had or knew, and the killer needed to retrieve or suppress it?" Nash frowned. "The thumb drive." "Perhaps," she said. "But if so, why leave it behind? That seems careless, and our imposter was anything but." A young officer entered, holding a folder. "You asked for Felix Oxley's personal correspondence, ma'am. There's something strange here." He handed it over. Among the usual bland exchanges about bank audits and contracts, Miss Marple found one curious email from 2 weeks before the flight. "If the walls are closing in, someone's asking questions they shouldn't. If the files are still with you, we need to make sure they're protected. Not just from the authorities." From her. Jay. "Who's Jay?" Nash asked. A name surfaced after some digging. Julian Roque, a former MI5 analyst turned private risk consultant. He'd worked with Felix briefly during a fraud investigation into a European shell company. They found him in a hotel in Kensington, registered under a false name. He was pale, tired, and unshaven. "She'll come for me too," Julian said, hands trembling as he lit a cigarette. "She's not just some freelance assassin. She used to be someone Someone trained. We used to call her the Glass Widow." "The what?" Nash said sharply. "She worked Black Ops." "Never on paper. She was burned years ago, vanished after an op went wrong in Eastern Europe. She resurfaced last year. We think someone's paying her to clean up loose ends." Felix had dirt on several of her employers. Names, dates, money trails. If she thought he'd turn. "She killed him," Miss Marple said quietly. "But that doesn't explain the elaborate ruse. The stewardess disguise, the decoy, the man pretending to be Melling. Why all the theater?" Julian exhaled smoke. "Because there's more. Felix had a backup, a dead man's switch. If he died under suspicious circumstances, a file would be released to the press. She had to find it before that happened." Nash leaned forward. "Do you know where it is?" "Number, but Felix wouldn't keep it digital. He always said the safest vault was one no one noticed." Miss Marple's eyes sparkled. "A vault no one notices," she murmured. "What better vault than one that floats above the clouds?" She requested immediate access to the aircraft. Again. This time she brought Julian with her. They walked the narrow aisle of first class. Miss Marple paused at seat 3A, gazing at the floor beneath the seat. "There," she said suddenly. "Lift the carpeting." Beneath the matting was a panel, meant to access wiring, but someone had modified it. Taped beneath the cables was a slim envelope sealed in wax. Julian opened it with shaking hands. Inside were printed documents, photographs, and a handwritten letter signed by Felix. "To whoever finds this. If you're reading this, I've likely been silenced. The information enclosed details accounts, names, and contracts of those laundering money through diplomatic channels. These are the people who would rather erase history than face justice. I kept this hidden from all my clients. If I die, let the truth live." F.O. Nash took the files and passed them to a courier bound for MI5. It was damning. Enough to implicate foreign officials, weapons dealers, even members of a private intelligence group believed defunct. But there was still one unanswered question. Miss Marple turned to Julian. "Tell me," she said gently, "how did you know the Glass Widow would be on that flight?" Julian stiffened. "I didn't." "You did. You registered at this hotel the night before the flight arrived. You never returned to your flat. You were already in hiding before Felix vanished. Why?" Julian said nothing. Miss Marple's voice dropped to a whisper. "Because you were the one who told her Felix had the drive. You helped set up the hit, didn't you?" His face collapsed inward, shame flooding his features. "I didn't think she'd kill him, just scare him, retrieve the data. That was the deal. And then she double-crossed you." He nodded slowly. "She always does." Miss Marple's tone was cool. "And yet you lived, which means she's not finished. Either with you or someone else." Outside the hotel, the London fog thickened, and far away, in another part of the city, a woman in a maintenance uniform stepped onto a train bound for Dover, carrying a black satchel and wearing a new name. The press conference was held in the gleaming atrium of Scotland Yard, beneath the domed skylight where news cameras whirred and reporters buzzed like bees around a hive. Detective Inspector Nash stood behind the podium, his expression carefully neutral as he read from the prepared statement. "With the help of law enforcement agencies across 3 countries, we have identified and apprehended 2 individuals involved in the disappearance of Mr. Felix Oxley. The evidence recovered, including financial documents and recorded testimony, points to a criminal conspiracy involving illegal money laundering, impersonation, and murder." Flashes popped. A reporter shouted, "So the case is closed?" Nash hesitated only a second. "The central threat has been neutralized. We are confident justice will be served." To the public, it was a clean end. Julian Roke had been arrested that morning, caught attempting to board a ferry at Folkestone under another false name. His confession, combined with the contents of the hidden envelope retrieved from beneath seat 3A, had painted him as the orchestrator of the entire affair. A man who sold out his colleague for a price and used criminal contacts to carry out the assassination. The files Felix left behind were damning, implicating Julian in schemes that stretched from Gibraltar to Dubai. It all fit together, almost too well. Back in Nash's office, Miss Marple sat silently, her gloved hands folded over her handbag. She hadn't attended the press conference, nor had she congratulated Nash. Her gaze was distant, thoughtful, like someone listening for a sound no one else could hear. "You don't believe it," Nash said finally. She smiled faintly. "No, I believe Julian is guilty of something. Perhaps many things, but not murder. Not this murder." He raised an eyebrow. "He confessed. He confessed to planning it, not committing it. He admitted to alerting the woman, what did he call her? The Glass Widow. But that's the curious part, isn't it? For someone who claimed to know her well, he never gave us a name. Never even a physical description." Nash frowned. "He said she was a ghost, operated in the dark. Or he didn't know her at all," Miss Marple said. "Only what others told him, which means the woman who walked off that plane in a maintenance uniform, she's still out there, and she's watching." That evening, while others toasted a job well done, Miss Marple asked for a second look at the Heathrow CCTV footage. Not just the gates or terminals this time, but the parking garages, the service corridors, even the cargo bay. Anything that might have gone unnoticed in the initial sweep. It was after midnight when she paused the footage on a frame from a side entrance rarely used, an unmarked door between the hangars. A security camera caught a figure exiting the building, wheeling a janitorial cart. The figure wore overalls and a face mask. Not unusual, but as the cart rolled forward, something glinted beneath the cleaning rags. A badge. Silver. Airline issued. She rewound. Paused again. She wasn't hiding the badge, she murmured. She wanted it seen, just barely. Just enough to prove she belonged. And then she vanished. Into a parking structure, out of frame. Nash leaned over her shoulder. "We already searched that lot." "But did you search the vehicles?" she asked. "Specifically the stolen ones." The list of missing vehicles near the airport had been short. Only one on the day of the flight, a white Toyota maintenance van. It had never been recovered. They tracked it 2 days later, found abandoned in an industrial park in Dagenham. The interior had been stripped clean. No fingerprints, no hair. But tucked inside the glove compartment was a curious item. A child's toy, cheap, plastic, brightly colored. A cartoon airplane, its eyes wide with joy. Miss Marple turned it over in her hand. "She left this for us." "A taunt?" Nash asked. "No," she said quietly. "A reminder." That same night, they reviewed Felix Oxley's personal effects again. His satchel had been returned to his family, untouched except for a routine inventory. But Nash, now unsettled, had it recalled. Inside were the usual items. A wallet, business cards, a phone wiped clean. But at the bottom of the bag, folded into the lining, they found a second envelope. This one was smaller, older, handwritten. It wasn't addressed to Nash or the police. It was addressed to her, Miss Jane Marple. She opened it slowly, the brittle paper whispering secrets as it unfolded. "Miss Marple, if anyone can make sense of this, I believe it's you. I met you once, years ago, in Malta. You wouldn't remember me. I was young and stupid, chasing the tail of a diplomat's wife who wasn't really a wife at all. You solved a theft that never made the papers. You also saved my career. I think someone is trying to kill me. Not just for money, for silence. I've stumbled into something deeper than finance. Something old, political. If they get to me, there will be more bodies. And you're the only one I trust to see what others won't." Faux Miss Marple read it twice before setting it down. He didn't just want justice, she said softly. He wanted a reckoning. The next day, Nash received an anonymous tip. A foreign national, name unconfirmed, had been admitted to a private hospital in Geneva. She had injuries consistent with a fall, skull fracture, partial amnesia, the clinic said, but no ID, no known contacts. She was found unconscious in a cargo crate at a regional airfield outside Brussels, and on her wrist was a small scar, the same shape and location as one visible in the security footage of the Heathrow technician, the imposter who walked off the plane. Could be her, Nash said, or another smokescreen. Miss Marple didn't answer at once. She gazed through the hospital photos, her expression unreadable. She's not done, she murmured. This was a game, a dress rehearsal. There's something larger behind it. Something the files, the murder, even Julian couldn't explain. He sighed. You think we've declared victory too soon. She looked at him, eyes cool and clear. You've declared it. I haven't. Outside, the city moved on, blissfully unaware. But in the quiet corners, in airports and alleys and rooms with no windows, the real enemy had only just begun to watch. And Miss Marple, sharp-eyed and steady-handed, waited patiently for her to move again. The air inside Miss Marple's small London flat was quiet, filled only with the soft ticking of the mantel clock and the rustle of case papers spread across her sitting-room table. Outside, rain painted the windows in slow, silver strokes. She held Felix Oxley's old letter in one hand and an envelope of grainy surveillance prints in the other, eyes flitting between them with the patience of someone who had watched human lies unravel for decades. Something still gnawed at her. It wasn't the vanishing woman or the convenient timing of Julian Roque's arrest. It was Felix himself. His tone, the way he'd written that final note, as if speaking to someone who knew the rules of a deeper game. Miss Marple rose, walked to her bookshelf, and pulled down a dusty folder marked Malta, 1972. She remembered the case well. A minor scandal, hushed up quickly, a theft at a diplomatic gala, blamed on a chambermaid who conveniently vanished. But what she remembered most wasn't the theft. It was a young, lanky assistant to the British consulate. Nervous, awkward, eyes darting every which way. Felix Oxley. She had forgotten him entirely until his death had dragged that old memory back to the surface like a fish on a line. At the time, he was little more than a boy, too clever, too eager, and far too curious for his own good. He'd asked questions he shouldn't have and nearly gotten himself expelled from the service. And now he was dead. She pulled out a photograph from the Malta file, an official reception snapped by a photographer in mid-toast. She squinted. There was Felix, barely 20, standing near the edge of the group. To his left was a man with cold, slicked-back hair, shaking hands with a European ambassador. Miss Marple's heart quickened. The man wasn't listed in the photo's captions, but she recognized the face. She had seen it again recently, in the background of a newspaper clipping Nash had passed over casually. A recent article on foreign investment in UK energy infrastructure. The man now went by the name Stefan Delvaux, but in 1972 he had been known as Erich Müller, a Swiss-born consultant to several shadowy diplomatic liaisons. And if her memory served, he had quietly fled Malta after a series of unexplained financial irregularities. Nothing ever proven. She called Nash at once. "Inspector," she said calmly, "we need to talk about Felix's past and his connection to a man you've never heard of." 2 hours later, Nash sat at her table staring at the photograph. "I don't see it," he said, though his voice held the faint tremble of doubt. "There's no record of this Müller fellow connected to Oxley's murder. No fingerprints, no sightings, nothing." "Because you're looking in the wrong decade," she replied. "Delvaux has changed his identity at least twice. I believe Felix recognized him recently. That's what triggered the spiral, the paranoia, the letter, the files. Delvaux wasn't just an old ghost from Malta. He's the man who funded the very company Julian worked for. Nash froze. Wait, you're saying Delvaux was behind the shell firm Julian used to launder funds? I am, Miss Marple said. And I think Felix stumbled upon something larger than he realized. A decades-old network of compromised officials, manipulated finances, and, most crucially, a cover-up that began long before Flight 227 took off. Nash began flipping through the files in sudden haste. But we have nothing that links Delvaux directly to the crime. No transactions, no motive, no present motive, she corrected. But we've been so focused on Felix's current enemies, we overlooked the ones he made long ago. It was Nash who returned 2 days later with the thread that changed everything. I ran Delvaux's former aliases through the archives, he said, entering without preamble. One came up in a sealed MI5 file, connected to a cold case from 1984. A body found in a Zurich hotel. Female, mid-30s, no ID, but the forensic sketch matches the description of the woman we think walked off that plane. Miss Marple looked up sharply. That's impossible. She's alive. No, he said grimly. This woman wasn't the killer. She was the original Glass Widow, and she died 40 years ago. He laid down a folder. Inside were blurred photos of the crime scene, dated receipts, and a coroner's note. But the most damning item was a torn airline ticket. Heathrow to Zurich. Dated the same day Felix was supposed to have been visiting family in Devon. A teenage Felix. It doesn't make sense, Nash said. He couldn't have been there. Miss Marple's mind was already racing. Unless he wasn't visiting family, unless he followed someone or was taken. The link was tenuous but chilling. Felix caught up in a scandal in Malta. A mysterious woman killed in Zurich, a financier with too many names and too few records, and now, decades later, Felix dead on a flight tied to a false identity worn like a costume. Then Nash dropped the final stone. We've matched a fingerprint from the van to a woman named Katharina Müller, last seen in Brussels. No official record after 1996, presumed dead, until she showed up in Geneva last week with a head injury. The woman in the hospital, Miss Marple whispered. Nash nodded. She's not a killer. She's a survivor, possibly the survivor, and maybe, just maybe, she's the key to the whole thing. They flew to Geneva that night. The woman lay silent in her hospital bed, her face pale and bandaged. When Miss Marple entered, the woman's eyes flicked toward her with an instinctive wariness, like a bird sensing the wind shift. She sat beside her. I knew a woman in Zurich once, she said gently. She died a long time ago, and I think you knew her too. The woman's gaze held, unblinking. Then a whisper, my sister. Miss Marple felt a chill rise. She died in 1984. Did Felix know her? A long pause. Yes, he loved her. And when she died, he didn't run. He buried it. They all did. Who are they? The woman closed her eyes. The ones who never left Malta. With that, the shadows of the past rose once more, long arms reaching from old scandals into the present. The crime was no longer about a single murder on a plane. It was the final ripple of a storm born decades ago. One that Miss Marple now knew she would have to trace back to the beginning if she wanted to catch the one who had waited in silence and killed in whispers. Miss Marple had always believed that people, when pressed in the right way, revealed more than they intended. Not through grand confessions or sudden outbursts, but through small things, the way they touched their collar when lying, the careful pauses before certain words, or the unguarded expression that passed like a flicker of shadow across the face. Now, as she sat beside Inspector Nash in the drab grey briefing room of Scotland Yard, those instincts were sharpening once again. They were down to 3 real suspects. Julian Roke, whose alibi was weak, but whose every word had been scrubbed clean by the press and his lawyers. Adela Stone, the corporate liaison with diplomatic immunity and a spine of iron, and Stefan Delvaux, the ghost with 20 faces and no fingerprints, untouchable unless someone made him bleed in the mind. Miss Marple didn't believe in chasing ghosts, but she did believe in bait, so she proposed something unconventional. "Invite them all," she told Nash. "All three, here, at once." Nash blinked. "Together, in the same room?" "Exactly. Not for questioning, not directly. For tea. Tea. Yes. Not interrogation, but performance. Give them a false sense of victory. Tell them the investigation is wrapping up. Let them feel safe. And then, watch." The next afternoon, Miss Marple prepared the room herself. A long oak table, fresh scones, white china, nothing too elegant or too shabby. She chose a seat near the window, where she could watch each face by the filtered daylight. A microphone was tucked inside the floral centerpiece. Cameras were already hidden in the ceiling, per Nash's arrangement. At precisely 4 o'clock, the guests arrived. Julian Roke came first, dressed in a subdued charcoal suit and silk tie. He looked tired, but composed. Adela Stone followed, her every movement precise. Her eyes met Miss Marple's for the briefest moment, then moved on. And finally, Stefan Delvaux, silver-haired, impeccably dressed, his charm as practiced as a polished blade. He smiled at Miss Marple like an old friend, though he'd never met her before. Tea was served. Small talk began, art, weather, the slow turn of world events. Miss Marple played the amiable hostess, inserting just the right notes of forgetfulness as if she were slightly past her prime. It helped disarm, let them underestimate her. It was Delvaux who first broke the surface tension. "I'm told your file on this case is nearly finished, Inspector," he said, sipping his tea. "A relief, I'm sure." Nash smiled politely. "Nearly. Just tying up ends." "A complicated matter," Adela added, "but I suppose even shadows dissolve under proper light." Miss Marple gave a soft chuckle. "Oh, not always, my dear. Some shadows simply learn to wear different coats." Julian's hand twitched. Just once. Miss Marple turned to him with grandmotherly warmth. "I must say, you remind me of my nephew Raymond. Always so particular about his tea. Would you mind terribly showing me how you take yours?" He blinked. Just milk." "Ah, yes. But not too much. Raymond always said too much milk ruined the taste of things." Julian gave a half smile. "It does dilute it, yes." "I find that interesting," she said gently, watching him stir the cup. "Considering how many things you've diluted over the years, contracts, audits, company records, it must become a habit." There was a stillness. Julian's stirring stopped. He looked up, confused, then forced a laugh. "I'm not sure I follow." Miss Marple nodded, as if she'd lost her train of thought. No, my mistake. I do tend to ramble." But she had seen what she needed. Julian had reacted not to the insinuation, but to the word diluted. It was Adela who next tripped. When the conversation turned to history, Miss Marple brought up Malta, casually, as if remembering a holiday. "Beautiful country," she said. "Though I hear the diplomatic scene was delicate back in the 70s. Scandals, I think. Unfortunate deaths. Disappearances." Adela was reaching for a biscuit, but her hand paused mid-air. She didn't look at Miss Marple. She looked at Delvaux. It lasted less than a second, but it was enough. There was history between them, history that had never been reported. Still, Miss Marple said nothing. Not yet. Then she played her final card. "I read a peculiar article this morning," she mused aloud, "about a rare condition. Capgras delusion. Are you familiar with it?" Delvaux arched an eyebrow. Not intimately. Oh, it's quite tragic. The patient believes someone close to them has been replaced by an impostor. Often it's a spouse or sibling. They'll insist with certainty that the person looks identical, but isn't real, isn't the same. She glanced at him. Fascinating how the brain protects itself from betrayal. Don't you think? Delvaux's smile remained, but he shifted in his chair, and then came the moment she had waited for. The waitress entered, bringing in a second tray of tea. As she set it down, one of the china cups tilted and spilled just slightly, enough to splash across Delvaux's cuff. He hissed and stood. The waitress apologized profusely, but Delvaux waved her away. "It's nothing," he muttered. "Clumsy. These things always happen when you least expect." Then he stopped, because Miss Marple was watching him, closely. She rose from her seat, walked over, and handed him a folded napkin, and in doing so she touched his wrist. Cold. Too cold, not just from the tea. It was trembling, just slightly. She looked into his eyes and spoke softly enough that only he could hear. "You were on that plane. Not in spirit. Not behind some desk. You were there. You thought wearing the face of a dead man would keep you safe. But masks slip, Mr. Delvaux. They always do." For a fraction of a second, his expression broke. Then it was gone. He turned to Nash. "I think we're finished here." But he had already said too much, by saying nothing at all. Later that evening in the observation room, Nash played back the footage frame by frame. The glances, the pauses, the twitch of Julian's hand, Adela's reflexive look, Delvaux's shiver. None of it was confession, but none of it was innocent. Miss Marple sipped her tea. "We've shown them the stage," she said. "Now we let them wonder what we saw. And when one of them slips, we'll be watching." The trap wasn't made of steel or sirens. It was made of psychology, of tea and shadows, of words that meant more than they appeared. A quiet battle of nerves, and Miss Marple had always believed that people, when pressed in the right way, revealed more than they intended. Not through grand confessions or sudden outbursts, but through small things, the way they touched their collar when lying, the careful pauses before certain words, or the unguarded expression that passed like a flicker of shadow across the face. Now, as she sat beside Inspector Nash in the drab-grey briefing room of Scotland Yard, those instincts were sharpening once again. They were down to 3 real suspects: Julian Roke, whose alibi was weak, but whose every word had been scrubbed clean by the press and his lawyers; Adela Stone, the corporate liaison with diplomatic immunity and a spine of iron; and Stéphane Delvaux, the ghost with 20 faces and no fingerprints, untouchable unless someone made him bleed in the mind. Miss Marple didn't believe in chasing ghosts, but she did believe in bait, so she proposed something unconventional. "Invite them all," she told Nash. "All 3. Here. At once." Nash blinked. "Together? In the same room?" "Exactly. Not for questioning, not directly. For tea. Yes. Not interrogation, but performance. Give them a false sense of victory. Tell them the investigation is wrapping up. Let them feel safe. And then, watch." The next afternoon, Miss Marple prepared the room herself. A long oak table, fresh scones, white china, nothing too elegant or too shabby. She chose a seat near the window, where she could watch each face by the filtered daylight. A microphone was tucked inside the floral centerpiece. Cameras were already hidden in the ceiling, per Nash's arrangement. At precisely 4 o'clock, the guests arrived. Julian Roke came first, dressed in a subdued charcoal suit and silk tie. He looked tired, but composed. Adela Stone followed, her every movement precise. Her eyes met Miss Marple's for the briefest moment, then moved on. And finally, Stefan Delvaux. Silver-haired, impeccably dressed, his charm as practiced as a polished blade. He smiled at Miss Marple like an old friend, though he'd never met her before. Tea was served. Small talk began: art, weather, the slow turn of world events. Miss Marple played the amiable hostess, inserting just the right notes of forgetfulness, as if she were slightly past her prime. It helped disarm, let them underestimate her. It was Delvaux who first broke the surface tension. "I'm told your file on this case is nearly finished, Inspector," he said, sipping his tea. A relief, I'm sure. Nash smiled politely. "Nearly. Just tying up ends." "A complicated matter," Adela added, "but I suppose even shadows dissolve under proper light." Miss Marple gave a soft chuckle. "Oh, not always, my dear. Some shadows simply learn to wear different coats." Julian's hand twitched. Just once. Miss Marple turned to him with grandmotherly warmth. "I must say, you remind me of my nephew Raymond, always so particular about his tea. Would you mind terribly showing me how you take yours?" He blinked. Just milk." "Ah, yes. But not too much. Raymond always said too much. Milk ruined the taste of things." Julian gave a half smile. "It does dilute it, yes." "I find that interesting," she said gently, watching him stir the cup. "Considering how many things you've diluted over the years, contracts, audits, company records, it must become a habit." There was a stillness. Julian's stirring stopped. He looked up, confused, then forced a laugh. "I'm not sure I follow." Miss Marple nodded, as if she'd lost her train of thought. No, my mistake. I do tend to ramble." But she had seen what she needed. Julian had reacted not to the insinuation, but to the word diluted. It was Adela who next tripped. When the conversation turned to history, Miss Marple brought up Malta, casually, as if remembering a holiday. "Beautiful country," she said, "though I hear the diplomatic scene was delicate back in the 70s. Scandals, I think. Unfortunate deaths. Disappearances." Adela was reaching for a biscuit, but her hand paused mid-air. She didn't look at Miss Marple. She looked at Delvaux. It lasted less than a second. But it was enough. There was history between them, history that had never been reported. Still, Miss Marple said nothing. Not yet. Then she played her final card. "I read a peculiar article this morning," she mused aloud, "about a rare condition, Capgras delusion. Are you familiar with it?" Delvaux arched an eyebrow. "Not intimately." "Oh, it's quite tragic. The patient believes someone close to them has been replaced by an imposter. Often it's a spouse or sibling. They'll insist with certainty that the person looks identical, but isn't real, isn't the same." She glanced at him. "Fascinating how the brain protects itself from betrayal, don't you think?" Delvaux's smile remained, but he shifted in his chair. And then came the moment she had waited for. The waitress entered, bringing in a second tray of tea. As she set it down, one of the china cups tilted and spilled just slightly, enough to splash across Delvaux's cuff. He hissed and stood. The waitress apologized profusely, but Delvaux waved her away. "It's nothing," he muttered. "Clumsy. These things always happen when you least expect." Then he stopped, because Miss Marple was watching him, closely. She rose from her seat, walked over and handed him a folded napkin, and in doing so, she touched his wrist. Cold, too cold, not just from the tea. It was trembling, just slightly. She looked into his eyes and spoke softly enough that only he could hear. "You were on that plane. Not in spirit, not behind some desk. You were there. You thought wearing the face of a dead man would keep you safe, but masks slip, Mr. Delvaux. They always do." For a fraction of a second, his expression broke. Then it was gone. He turned to Nash. "I think we're finished here." But he had already said too much. By saying nothing at all. Later that evening in the observation room, Nash played back the footage frame by frame. The glances, the pauses, the twitch of Julian's hand, Adela's reflexive look, Delvaux's shiver. None of it was confession, but none of it was innocent. Miss Marple sipped her tea. "We've shown them the stage," she said. "Now we let them wonder what we saw. And when one of them slips, we'll be watching." The trap wasn't made of steel or sirens. It was made of psychology, of tea and shadows, of words that meant more than they appeared. A quiet battle of nerves. And Miss Marple had just claimed the opening victory. S. Marple had just claimed the opening victory. The rain fell heavier that night, painting the cobbled streets in streaks of silver and black. The weight of the investigation pressed down on Scotland Yard like a storm cloud that refused to break. The stolen evidence, the shifting suspects, the whispered threats. Miss Marple had unraveled webs before, but this one was tangled with threads someone was actively trying to cut. Inspector Nash had taken precautions. Evidence was locked down, security tripled, and his team placed under constant watch. But still, the killer moved freely, just out of reach, just out of sight. And then, just past midnight, the phone rang. "Inspector Nash, we have a situation. A crime scene, a body, not from the old case." This was new. Within the hour, Nash stood beneath the flickering lamps of an old mews flat not far from Chelsea, a small upscale apartment nestled between antique shops and quiet cafes. No signs of forced entry, no smashed windows, but on the polished wooden floor, under the glare of sterile white lights, lay the body of Detective Sergeant Lyle Brenner, dead, shot twice in the chest, once in the head, a note pinned to his coat. Curiosity is a dangerous affliction. Miss Marple arrived shortly after, escorted by a grim-faced constable. She studied the scene with a practiced eye, her expression unreadable. Brenner had been the first crack in the conspiracy. He'd discovered the false ownership of the watch, the connection to someone powerful, and now, conveniently, he was silent. "This wasn't panic," she murmured. "This was cleanup." Inspector Nash looked hollow. He never even left a message. No record of who he spoke to last, and the phone wiped. Completely. Miss Marple turned her gaze to the bookshelf. One volume, Diplomatic Immunity and International Law, had been pulled slightly forward. Her fingers brushed its spine. She opened it. Nothing inside but pressed pages. But she knew. This wasn't just about silencing Brenner. It was about sending a message. "You see what this means, don't you?" she said quietly. Nash nodded. "The killer's still active, watching us, and they're accelerating." Miss Marple exhaled, slow and steady. "Then we have less time than I thought." The next morning, chaos erupted again. Julian Roque, one of their key suspects, vanished. His townhouse in Mayfair was empty, his phone discarded on the front steps like a taunt. No signs of struggle, no signs of flight. But Miss Marple noticed one detail everyone else missed. His study light had been left on, and the chair slightly off-center, facing away from the door. Someone else had been there. Someone Julian hadn't expected to fear. A friend, or someone in disguise. The press caught wind within hours. "Suspect flees in midnight escape," the headline screamed. Nash was furious, but Miss Marple only folded the paper carefully and placed it aside. "He didn't run," she said. Nash blinked. "You think he was taken?" "I think he got too close. Like Brenner, and someone took action before we could. It was no longer about solving a murder. Now it was about stopping the next one. And Miss Marple had the chilling sense that she might be next. The next night, she tested her theory. She set a trap, not a dramatic one, No stakeouts, no squads of constables. Just a quiet walk to the Delvaux estate. A visit she hadn't yet made, deliberately withheld. She wanted the villain to know she was moving. The estate was cloaked in mist. Its Gothic arches and carved angels loomed in moonlight like mourners at a funeral. She was led to the drawing room. Maurice Delvaux waited by the fireplace, still dressed in evening black, a glass of wine untouched on the mantel. "I wondered when you'd come," he said. She studied him. "I see the rumors of your withdrawal were exaggerated." He smiled faintly. "I do enjoy a dramatic gesture, but I suspect that's not why you're here." "No," she said softly. "I'm here because 2 men are gone. One murdered, one vanished, and I believe you know why." His face remained still. Too still. "I didn't kill them. Number, but you know who did." A flicker then, a tightening of the jaw, a spark of recognition. "You've been protecting someone," she continued. "From the very start. You erased the evidence. You manipulated witnesses. Not for yourself, but for them." Silence. Then Delvaux walked to a cabinet and withdrew a small red velvet box. He opened it and revealed a single cufflink, polished silver, engraved with the letter E. "Brenner left this in my study," he said. "He didn't trust Nash, said he was being watched. He begged me to hide it." Miss Marple took the cufflink carefully. "Whose is it?" Delvaux looked her in the eye. "My brother's." Back at Scotland Yard, Nash's face turned ashen when she placed the cufflink on his desk. "Elias Delvaux?" he breathed. Maurice's younger brother, not publicly involved in the case. Barely a shadow, but once a high-level intelligence officer. Discharged, quietly disgraced. Now invisible, but never inactive. "He has the training," Miss Marple said. "The access, the motive, and the family loyalty. And he's out there now." "Worse," she said. "He's preparing something else. This was never about one murder. It's a game. He's eliminating threats, us, the people closing in." Nash paled. "Julian's still alive," she said. "I believe Elias needs him for something. A final play." Nash stood abruptly. "Then we find him, and fast." By dawn, a special task force was mobilized. Delvaux's estate was placed under surveillance. Alerts were issued to border security and intelligence services. Miss Marple stood in the briefing room, silent as the storm built around her. The twist hadn't just deepened the mystery. It had changed the war, because now she knew the killer wasn't just clever. He was trained, he was protected, and worst of all, he was not finished. The clock had started ticking, and the next victim could be anyone. The rain had finally stopped. After days of grey skies and wet pavements, the morning light spilled across London like a quiet promise. But inside Scotland Yard, the mood remained dark. 2 lives had been taken. One erased, one presumed missing, and the name Elias Delvaux now haunted every room it entered. Inspector Nash hadn't slept. He sat in his office, poring over files, phone records, and interviews, trying to force a line of logic to emerge from the fog. Meanwhile, Miss Marple moved quietly, as she always did, not in circles, but in spirals, closing in with each pass. And then she noticed it. A single page in the evidence log. Something she'd looked at a dozen times already. It had once seemed trivial, an inventory note from the original crime scene. Item number 17, a bottle of Chateau Never, 1998, uncorked, contents partially consumed. It had been found in Julian Roque's private study the night of the murder. But what struck her now wasn't the wine. It was the label. She remembered Maurice Delvaux's drawing room. His unopened bottle of Chateau Never, identical in year and vintage, but from a private collection. A limited run of fewer than 100 bottles, made for Internal diplomatic gifting, not available to the public, and Julian Roque hadn't been a diplomat. How did he get one? She moved quickly, pulling files, cross-referencing photos, and then she found it. Roque and Elias Delvaux, photographed together 12 years ago at an embassy gala in Vienna. Standing side by side. Roque with his usual smug smirk. Elias, bland, forgettable, tucked into the crowd like wallpaper. They knew each other. Long before the murder. Long before the watch. It was a friendship no one had thought to question. Until now. At Scotland Yard, she met Nash in the operations room. "Something's been bothering me," she said, placing the photographs and documents on the table. "All this time we've been working off the assumption that Elias Delvaux went rogue after the murder." Nash leaned in. "You're saying he was involved before?" "Not just involved, orchestrating it. Every move we've traced, every false lead, every missing piece wasn't a reaction. It was a preparation. Roque's disappearance, Brenner's murder, even the vanishing evidence. It wasn't improvised. It was part of a sequence." Nash frowned. "So why expose himself at all?" "Because he needed chaos," she replied. "To move, to clean, to silence, and most importantly, to extract something." She pulled out a map. On it, pins marked the key locations. Delvaux Estate, Roque's townhouse, Brenner's flat, and the original crime scene. She drew a line through them. It formed a triangle. "Each site is connected not just by the people involved," she said, "but by Elias's access, and the dates match. Each major disruption, Brenner's death, Roque's disappearance, the stolen file, occurred 72 hours apart." Nash stared. "That's not random." "No," she said. "It's a pattern, a cycle, and if it holds, the next move is due tomorrow night." The missing piece was motive. They had chaos. They had connections. But what was the endgame? That evening, Miss Marple returned to the Delvaux estate, this time unannounced. Maurice answered the door, looking as though he hadn't moved in days. His hands shook slightly, and a half-burned fire smoldered in the hearth behind him. "You're here because of Elias," he said. "I am. And I believe you can help me stop him." He looked away. "Elias was always careful, always watching, but something changed 2 years ago. He started speaking in riddles, about control, about secrets buried too deep. I thought he was having a breakdown, but he said he was building something." "Building what?" she asked. Maurice hesitated. Then he opened a drawer and retrieved a slim, leather-bound journal. His. I never turned it in. I thought it might damn him. She flipped through the pages. Most were blank, but one stood out. A sketch of a machine. No labels, no instructions. Just lines and angles and something that looked almost like a vault or a safe. She looked up. "Where is this?" Maurice's voice cracked. "Under the original crime scene." It all came together then. The murdered man, Lord Harrington, had owned the warehouse where his body was found. Long abandoned, rumored to hold state secrets from wartime. But the investigation had never gone below the ground floor. Until now. That night, Miss Marple and Nash led a quiet team beneath the foundations. Dust choked the air, and the only sound was the shuffle of boots on concrete. They found a hatch hidden behind an old boiler, its lock long rusted but still firm. Inside was a room, bare, metallic, sterile, and at its center, a reinforced safe, still sealed. On the wall, scrawled in red marker, "The truth is mine." They opened the safe with tools from the yard. It took hours, and what they found inside was not gold, or blackmail, or weapons. It was information. Files, decades old, names, operations, covert activities buried so deep even the highest levels of government had forgotten them. Elias had been trying to erase his past, because within those pages Miss Marple found it, Operation Emberglass. A secret mission Elias had led in 2011, disavowed, suppressed. Everyone believed it had failed quietly. But the file revealed what really happened. Elias had betrayed his own team, stolen assets, sold information, and Harrington had known. That was the motive, not revenge. Fear. Elias hadn't killed to destroy others. He'd killed to survive. And now, knowing he was exposed, he was going to disappear again. Perhaps for good, unless they stopped him. "Tomorrow night," Miss Marple said quietly, as she and Nash left the vault. "He'll move again, this time for final insurance. And now, we know where." Nash nodded grimly. "We let him come, and we end this." As dawn broke over the city, the pieces finally clicked into place, not by force, not by luck, but through patience. The killer had moved like a ghost through their lives, but even ghosts cast shadows, and Miss Marple had finally seen his. The pattern had emerged, and the trap was ready. They waited in silence. Inside the cold shell of the abandoned Harrington warehouse, beneath the city's ceaseless hum, Inspector Nash and Miss Marple sat cloaked in shadow. It was nearing midnight, the hour their calculations predicted Elias Delvaux would return. The trap had been set. Every approach was covered, every camera live, and every corridor mapped. But Miss Marple's mind was elsewhere. She wasn't thinking about logistics or surveillance. She was thinking about why. Why would a man like Elias, a quiet intelligence officer turned estate caretaker, choose to orchestrate a chain of murders, thefts, and disappearances? The files in the hidden vault had told a damning story. Elias had betrayed a secret operation, erased witnesses, and tried to cover his tracks with surgical precision, but even that felt too neat, too clinical. People killed for fear. They covered their crimes out of self-preservation. Yet Elias had done more than that. He'd woven a narrative, taunted authorities, danced around detection. That wasn't the action of a cornered man. It was the action of a believer. And that frightened her more than any motive rooted in survival. A soft chime echoed in Nash's earpiece. Motion sensor, north entrance. A figure was moving inside. The detective gestured silently, and armed officers tensed in position. On the grainy security monitor, a tall man in a charcoal coat stepped into frame. Elias Delvaux. He moved with calm confidence, navigating the warehouse like a man walking through memory. He paused at the stairwell leading to the underground chamber and placed a gloved hand on the wall, right where the hidden vault lay beneath. Miss Marple gave a nod. Now. They moved quickly. Within seconds, Elias was surrounded. "Elias Delvaux," Nash said, stepping forward. "You're under arrest for the murder of Julian Roque, Heinrich Brenner, and the unlawful concealment of state documents." But Elias smiled. "I wondered how long it would take you." Miss Marple stepped beside Nash. "You never meant to escape tonight. You came to watch us open the safe." His eyes flickered toward her, cold and clinical but tinged with curiosity. "You're sharper than the rest," he said quietly. "And yet you miscalculated," she replied. "You thought the past would stay buried." He gave a low chuckle. "Oh, the past didn't scare me. It was what came after that did." She tilted her head. "Explain." He looked around at the warehouse, once filled with secrets, now stripped bare. And then he spoke. "You know the file name, Operation Emberglass, but you don't know the result. That mission, it wasn't a failure. It was a success. Too successful. We recovered something we were never meant to find." Nash frowned. "What are you talking about?" "A list," Elias said. "A master ledger, codes, people, placements, an intelligence framework so vast it mapped not just enemies, but allies. It showed how fragile the world really was, how orchestrated and how disposable people like us had always been. He looked directly at Miss Marple. Harrington didn't die because he was blackmailing me. He died because he believed in the system, because he wanted to turn the ledger back in. So you silenced him, Nash said. No, Elias said. I liberated him. Miss Marple took a slow breath. You didn't just want to erase the past. You wanted to rewrite it. Elias nodded. We were pawns once. Now we could be players. She stepped closer. And Julian Roque? He was already part of it. He'd seen the ledger too. But he wavered. He started asking questions, doubting the cause. He had to disappear. Brenner too. Anyone who hesitated, anyone who might hesitate later, they had to be removed. You see it as murder. I see it as refinement. The words chilled her. You built this conspiracy not to hide, but to purify. His smile was thin. The intelligence world is rot. Years of hidden deals, secret wars, dead friends for cheap victories. I wanted to burn it down, cleanse it, create something leaner, smarter, faithful. Nash's jaw tightened. Faithful to what? To clarity, Elias said. No more allegiances to corrupt parliaments or toothless agencies. A network that answers only to truth, and to those strong enough to wield it. Miss Marple's voice was a whisper. You killed them because they didn't believe in your new order. I killed them because they were soft, he said, voice flat. Because they'd seen the world for what it was and chose to close their eyes. I won't. I refuse. She looked at him now, not with hatred, but with deep, pained understanding. You didn't fall into darkness, Mr. Delvaux. You built it, brick by brick, and told yourself it was light. He said nothing. The silence stretched. Then Nash gestured to the officers. Take him. As they moved forward, Elias raised his hands without resistance, but just before they cuffed him, he turned to Miss Marple and said, You know I'm right. Sooner or later, you'll see it too. She didn't answer. There was nothing to say. Later, as dawn lit the city, Nash and Miss Marple stood outside the warehouse. We were looking for motive, Nash said, and we found madness. No, she said softly. Not madness. Belief. He looked at her. There's nothing more dangerous than someone who believes they're saving the world while burning it to the ground. She turned to go, her coat wrapped tight against the morning chill. In her heart, she knew the case was over, but the echo of Elias's words would stay with her, because even when a man lies, when he murders, when he runs, there is a kind of truth that reveals itself in his conviction. And in the end, the most shocking motive wasn't power or revenge. It was redemption, twisted, terrifying, and absolute. The rain fell in thin, slanted sheets, whispering against the windows of the secluded manor on the edge of Grenton Hill. Inside, the drawing room was dark except for a single standing lamp, casting long shadows across the polished floor. The storm outside mirrored the turmoil within. Miss Marple stood by the fireplace, hands folded gently in front of her. Her eyes were calm, but the storm in her mind had long since passed. The pieces had all fallen into place. Elias Delvaux, once the quiet man in the background, the former intelligence analyst with a kind face and a watchmaker's precision, was the orchestrator of the entire web of deceit. The murders, the stolen files, the vanishing evidence, the manipulated loyalties. All of it had led here. And now, he was coming. She knew it. The invitation she had sent had been clear, if subtle. A fabricated emergency, an intercepted message implying that the Emberglass ledger had not been destroyed after all, and that someone intended to release its contents publicly. It was bait tailored for Elias's paranoia, and she knew he wouldn't be able to resist. Outside, gravel crunched under tires. She didn't move. In the next room, Inspector Nash and 2 officers waited in silence, hidden in the shadows. No drawn weapons, no shouted warnings. This would end without violence, or so she hoped. A moment later, the door creaked open. Elias entered alone. He paused when he saw her, the flickering lamplight catching the rain on his coat. His expression was unreadable, somewhere between curiosity and concern. "You called me," he said. "I did." He stepped into the room and shut the door behind him. "What is this, Jane?" Miss Marple gestured to the armchair across from her. "A conversation, one we never quite finished." He sat, his movement precise, deliberate. "I assume you didn't really find the emberglass ledger." "No," she admitted, "but I needed you to come, of your own accord." He exhaled slowly, running a hand through his damp hair. "And what would we talk about then? My crimes? Your clever deductions?" "No, Elias, your choices." That gave him pause. "You want to judge me," he said, quieter now. "No," she replied. "I want to understand you, and I want you to understand what's about to happen." He leaned forward. "Is this the part where you have me arrested? Where Nash walks in with a pair of handcuffs and a clever quip?" "He's already here," she said evenly. "But we're not here to humiliate you. You deserve something else." He tilted his head. "Such as? The truth?" She stepped forward, eyes locked on his. "You thought you were cleaning the rot from a dying system. But in doing so, you became the very thing you despised. You silenced people, manipulated them, sacrificed lives in service of an idea." He tensed, but she pressed on. "You called it clarity, redemption, control, but it was fear, Elias. Fear wearing a noble mask." "You don't understand," he said sharply. "I saw the world for what it is, lies wrapped in protocols, betrayal dressed up as diplomacy. What I did to keep people safe from that." Miss Marple's voice softened. "But you didn't protect anyone. You only tightened your circle, trusted fewer and fewer people, until, in the end, there was only you and a trail of corpses." He stood suddenly, his face pale but composed. "You have no idea what that ledger contained. The names, the operations, the leverage. Any one of those secrets could have toppled governments. I did the world a favor by making sure it stayed buried." "And yet," she said, "you came here tonight because part of you feared someone hadn't buried it, that someone else might have your power." He didn't speak. She continued, "That's why I know you're not a monster, Elias. You're a man who wanted to believe he was right, but the moment you made yourself the only judge, you were lost." The silence stretched. The storm outside seemed to hold its breath. Then Elias turned toward the door. "I suppose it doesn't matter now." "Elias," she said gently, "you still have a choice." He turned back. "Confess? Surrender? I'm not afraid of prison, Jane. I've lived in a prison of secrets for years." "No," she said. "I'm not asking for a confession. I'm asking for the truth. One final truth. Tell the world what you found. Let them decide what to do with it. Let the people whose lives were hidden in that ledger speak." He hesitated. "If you still believe in clarity," she said, "then stop hiding it." His face twisted. Grief, anger, exhaustion all bleeding together. "I can't," he whispered. "You don't know what chaos that would cause." "No," she said softly, "but I know what silence has already cost us." Outside, the wind howled against the windows. Then, slowly, Elias sat again. His hands trembled. And for the first time in all their meetings, she saw not a manipulator or a killer, but a man who had convinced himself he was the only one who could carry the burden of truth. "I'll tell them," he said quietly. "Everything." Miss Marple nodded once. Behind the hidden panel, Nash and the officers emerged, not with weapons but with recorders and files. Elias did not flinch. It took hours. He told them what the ledger contained, where he had hidden a duplicate copy, who had been part of the original operation and who had died to keep it secret. He named those who had benefited and those who had resisted. He wept once, only once, when he spoke of Julian Roke. When it was done, he stood. He offered his hands for the cuffs. Nash looked to Miss Marple. She nodded. Elias Delvaux was escorted into the storm. Later that morning, Miss Marple watched the sun rise over Grenton Hill. The storm had passed, but the air was heavy with what came next. A file would go public in 48 hours. Names, dates, truths too long buried. Justice would come, and chaos, and healing, and Elias Delvaux, who had tried to play God, would face the world not as a hero nor as a villain, but as a man finally seen for who he was. For Miss Marple, the case was over, but the story it told would echo for years to come. The morning after Elias Delvaux's confession broke grey and heavy over the town of Grenton. Headlines blared from every newspaper stand. Intelligence scandal unveiled. Whistleblower Elias Delvaux in custody. The Emberglass ledger revealed, decades of secrets exposed. For most, it felt like closure, but not for Miss Marple. She sat in her modest drawing room, pouring tea from her favorite floral pot, her movements unhurried but her mind unquiet. There was something she couldn't shake, something incomplete. Elias's confession had answered the how and why, but not the who else. The operations described in the Emberglass ledger were vast, involving dozens of influential figures, yet only a few had surfaced, and none had acted to stop Elias in the years leading up to his crimes. That kind of silence didn't happen naturally. She stirred a single cube of sugar into her tea. Across the room, Inspector Nash entered, holding a sealed envelope. "This came by courier," he said, setting it before her. "Addressed to you." Miss Marple opened it delicately. Inside was a single sheet of thick ivory paper. No signature, no return address. Just 5 words, written in a confident, looping hand. "You stopped the wrong man." Her spoon paused mid-stir. "Another threat?" Nash asked. "No," she said softly. A warning. Later that afternoon, Miss Marple returned to Grenton Manor, once the property of the late Julian Roke, whose murder had set this entire investigation in motion. The place was under administrative lock, but her special access as consultant granted her entry. She wandered the study again, letting her eyes drift over the shelves, the ink blotter, the framed awards. Something tickled her memory. Something Roke had said once, in passing, during an unrelated inquiry years ago. The real power in this country doesn't sit in front of microphones. It listens behind closed doors. She moved to the desk, pulled out every drawer. Nothing unusual. But then, she noticed the faint drag mark beneath the desk, an abrasion in the rug, too narrow for a chair leg. She crouched down and pressed against the wood panel. Click! A hidden compartment swung open. Inside was a dusty reel-to-reel recorder, and next to it, a stack of labeled tapes. With a trembling hand, Miss Marple selected the one marked Emergency, July 19th. She carried it to the listening room downstairs, switched on the machine and threaded the tape. Crackling silence. Then Roke's voice, subdued and quick. "If you're hearing this, I'm dead." I never trusted Elias completely. He was brilliant, but too rigid, too desperate for order. He thinks Emberglass was my idea. It wasn't. It was hers. A pause. "Lady Rowena Bexley." Miss Marple sat bolt upright. Roke continued. "She recruited me. She pulled the strings. Elias was just a pawn with delusions of grandeur. But Rowena used him, used all of us. She's the one who buried the real operations. If anyone has a complete copy of the ledger, it's her." Lady Rowena Bexley, the widow of Lord Hamilton Bexley, one-time Minister of Defence, A philanthropist, a patron of the arts, a ghost in every political photograph of the last 40 years, and the one person no one had questioned. Until now. That evening, Miss Marple and Nash arrived at Bexley House under the pretense of a courtesy call regarding Elias's case. Lady Esau. Rowena greeted them herself, composed, elegant, entirely unbothered by the chaos of recent events. "Such a dreadful business," she said, leading them into the drawing room. "I always liked Elias, though I admit I never fully understood his obsessions." Miss Marple gave a soft smile. "And yet it was your name Julian Roke uttered before he died." Rowena froze, just for a second. "A slip of a dying man," she said coolly. "He was under strain." "No," Miss Marple said gently. "He was scared. Of you." Rowena's hand gripped the arm of her chair, knuckles white. "May I?" Miss Marple asked, gesturing to the antique writing desk behind her. Rowena hesitated. "Be my guest." Inside the top drawer, nothing but stationery and quills. The second drawer. Miss Marple pulled it open slowly. A folder sat inside, bound in black ribbon. The seal on the front, a falcon, ember glass. "I believe this is the original," Miss Marple said, lifting it carefully. Rowena stood now, her calm evaporating. "I should have destroyed it," she said, voice low and steely. "But I thought perhaps one day I'd need it again, to control the ones left behind. Power, Miss Marple, isn't taken. It's preserved." "You let Elias take the fall," Miss Marple said. "You designed his descent. You used his obsession to keep your own hands clean." "He was eager to be used," Rowena snapped. "He wanted purpose. I gave it to him." Inspector Nash stepped forward. "Lady Bexley, you're under arrest for conspiracy, obstruction of justice, and decades of unlawful surveillance operations." Rowena gave a faint, sad smile. "Oh, Inspector, you think this will matter? I've survived 5 governments. I'll survive yours." Back at Scotland Yard, the Emberglass ledger, the complete one, was decrypted and verified. It exposed not only the dirty deeds Elias had confessed to, but a far deeper rot. Names, trusted officials, bank records, bribes, murders hidden behind political maneuvering. But most damning of all was the role Rowena Bexley played, the architect of the system, not its prisoner. In the days that followed, as resignations flooded Parliament and emergency hearings were convened, Miss Marple sat quietly on a park bench near the Thames, sipping tea from a thermos. Nash joined her, newspaper in hand. "She nearly got away with it," he said. "She would have," Miss Marple replied, "if she'd let Elias burn everything." He nodded. "How did you know?" "I didn't," she admitted. "Not for certain, but something always felt off. The way Elias feared the information falling into the wrong hands. He thought he was protecting it, but someone else had designed it from the start." She turned to him, her blue eyes sharp beneath the brim of her hat. "There's always one person who profits quietly when chaos erupts." He chuckled. "Remind me never to play chess. With you." She smiled. "You'd lose." The corridors of the High Court were packed. Press, politicians, foreign observers, and silent men in dark suits. The Emberglass trial had become the most significant case in a generation. As the final session opened, the world held its breath. At the center of it all sat Lady Rowena Bexley, stoic, composed, untouched by the storm her schemes had unleashed. And in the gallery, in a modest hat and dove-grey coat, sat Miss Jane Marple, knitting needles in hand and eyes as sharp as ever. The evidence had been overwhelming. Elias Delvaux's confession, the original Emberglass ledger recovered from Bexley House, dozens of witnesses, digital forensics, even Roke's posthumous tape naming her. Yet as the defense rose for closing arguments, murmurs grew. Rowena's legal team was formidable, and subtle gaps remained, No signed documents, no direct orders, no untraceable accounts in her name. The judge called for recess before the verdict. Miss Marple waited outside the courtroom. She wasn't knitting now. Inspector Nash joined her, face grim. "They might let her go," he muttered. "I know," she said. He looked at her. "You don't seem surprised." "I'm not," she said softly, "but I'm not done either." That night, with the city buzzing over speculation, Miss Marple returned to Grenton once more. There was one room she hadn't fully examined, Julian Roke's wine cellar. Official records had logged the area as part of the estate, but the detailed inventory had been sealed. Curious. With a flashlight and a careful eye, she descended the stone steps. Dust clouded the air. Rows of rare vintages lined the walls. Then she spotted it, a subtle crack in the limestone wall, a chill draft seeping through. She pressed. A false panel swung open with a faint creak. Inside, a narrow passage, and beyond that, a hidden vault, rows of boxes lined with velvet. But not wine, tapes, labeled, catalogued. Voices, documents, scanned ledgers, intercepted letters. Neatly stored. Evidence. One box in particular bore the mark of a falcon, the same symbol on the ember-glass ledger. Miss Marple opened it. Inside, a silver locket, delicate, engraved with initials. Not Rowena's. A R. She clicked it open. Inside was a tiny audio chip embedded carefully. Listening equipment disguised as jewelry. There was only one person who would wear something like that in these circles. Agatha Redgrave, the former Deputy Minister of Intelligence, long thought a whistleblower in the Emberglass affair. Redgrave had vanished months ago, presumed dead. Foul play suspected. Miss Marple's eyes narrowed. The next morning, as the court reconvened, she made a quiet stop at the prosecution's office and handed over the contents of the box. No fanfare. No declaration. "Wait for the verdict," she told them. "Then use this." The jury returned just after noon. There, verdict, not guilty. Gasps filled the courtroom. Reporters rushed to file headlines. Lady Rowena allowed herself a slow, victorious smile. The judge began to dismiss the court. But the prosecutor stood. "Your Honor," he said, voice shaking, "the Crown has received new evidence, fresh and conclusive." The courtroom fell silent. "In light of this, we request an immediate issuance of a new arrest warrant, this time for Lady Rowena Bexley on the charge of conspiracy to murder." A stunned silence. Rowena stood, outraged. "This is absurd." But then the tape played. "She told me if I went public I'd vanish like the rest. I recorded this in case I didn't survive." Agatha Redgrave's voice echoed through the chamber. "She wears innocence like silk, but behind it, blood and blackmail. The Emberglass ledger isn't even the worst of it. Ask her about Heathmore." Rowena paled. The judge banged the gavel. "Bailiff, take the defendant into custody." Rowena's mask finally cracked. Her lips twisted into something cold and venomous. "You fools have no idea what you've started." Outside the court, chaos reigned. Reporters swarmed. The crowd roared. Protesters cheered. Miss Marple stood on the steps, a picture of calm amid the storm. Nash found her there, blinking in disbelief. "You did it," he said. She didn't answer right away. "I found a vault beneath Roke's wine cellar," she finally said. "He was recording everything. Insurance, I imagine. Or guilt. And the locket." "Redgrave knew the danger," she said. But she didn't hide. She recorded her final conversations and passed them on in the only way she could. Nash shook his head. "You always find the thing no one else even knows to look for." Miss Marple gave a modest smile. "No, Inspector. I simply assume the truth is never where people claim it is. A week passed. Rowena Bexley remained in solitary confinement. The charges expanded. Murder, blackmail, decades of clandestine operations. Her empire crumbled, one file at a time. Justice, it seemed, had finally arrived. And yet, one evening, as the sun dipped behind the rooftops, Nash rushed into Miss Marple's cottage, face pale. "She's gone." Miss Marple looked up from her newspaper. "Gone?" "Rowena, escaped during transfer. Armed convoy ambushed just outside Dartmoor." Marple set down her tea. "Dead. No body." They stared at each other. Then Miss Marple exhaled slowly. She always planned for failure. That's what made her so dangerous. A month later, a parcel arrived at Miss Marple's cottage. No return address, no note. Inside, a chessboard, one piece missing, the queen, and in its place, a tiny white feather. Epilogue. Miss Marple stood at the edge of the cliffs, the wind tugging at her coat. Rowena was alive, somewhere, watching, waiting. Justice had been served. For now. But the game wasn't over, and in her quiet heart, Miss Marple knew it never would be. The bells of Grenton rang faintly through the cool evening air as Miss Marple took her usual walk down the village green. The Emberglass case had shaken Parliament, toppled ministers, and exposed rot in the highest corridors of power, but here the hedgerows bloomed as if nothing had changed. A curious peace had returned, and yet something tugged at her mind. The locket, the chessboard, the feather. Rowena Bexley was still out there, vanished like a phantom, slipping through the bars of justice with one final flourish. Some said she had fled to the Alps under an alias. Others whispered about deep contacts in intelligence circles who owed her favors. But Miss Marple knew better than to chase shadows. Instead, she turned her focus to what was real and unfinished. She returned that evening to Julian Roke's estate, now under official seal but quietly accessible to her, thanks to a nod from Inspector Nash. The wine cellar still echoed with secrets, and the vault she had uncovered, cunningly built behind limestone, still contained files that hadn't yet been sorted. One box in particular drew her attention, unmarked, pushed to the back, smaller than the rest. Inside, a set of photographs, old and grainy, black and white, likely taken with a covert camera decades ago. Miss Marple sat down, lantern flickering beside her. In one image, a young Rowena, hardly more than 20, sitting beside an older gentleman, stern, suited, cold-eyed. In another, the same man standing outside a private airfield. A jet in the background bore a symbol she recognized, a phoenix encircled in barbed wire. And in the last photo, the man shaking hands with someone that made her breath catch. Eleanor Whitmore, Grenton's beloved mayor, philanthropist, friend. She leaned in. The photo was dated 1983. She frowned. That was the year Eleanor arrived in Grenton, fresh from abroad, claiming to have left politics behind. Yet here she was, clearly working within the same clandestine web as Rowena's earliest handlers. Miss Marple tucked the photographs into her handbag. A question had been born, small but sharp. Back in her cottage, the hearth crackled and tea steeped, but the images lingered in her mind. She pulled out a map of Grenton, marked locations where events of the Emberglass case had unfolded. Then she circled another spot, Heathmore House. Rowena had muttered it during her courtroom outburst. No one had followed up. It was assumed to be a reference to her ancestral estate. But Miss Marple had lived in Grenton long enough to know that Heathmore House was the name of a long-demolished sanitarium on the outskirts of the village, abandoned in the 1950s after a fire. Rowena had never lived there, but she might have visited. She arrived at the site the next morning. Ivy had overgrown the ruins, but the hard outline of the stone foundation remained. She walked slowly, methodically, and then she found it, a rusted plaque half buried in the earth. Heathmore Institute, sponsored by the Whitmore Trust. So Eleanor Whitmore had ties to the building. She glanced around, then descended the charred stone steps to what had once been the lower levels. Storage, perhaps, or isolation wards. Dust thickened. Rats scurried. But then she saw it. A sealed door. Metal. Newer than the rest of the structure. She pressed her ear against it. A low hum. Still powered. Inspector Nash arrived 20 minutes later, flashlight in hand. "You find the only secret tunnel in this whole county every time," he muttered. "I don't find them," she said. "They whisper to me." They broke the lock. Inside, they found not madness or ghosts, but servers. A fully operational data center, humming beneath the ruins. Banks of screens, cables, and racks of hard drives. No guards, no staff. Just tech. Abandoned, but alive. "This was their real operation," Nash whispered. "While we chased ledgers and locket recordings, they had this." Miss Marple didn't speak. She stared at the central console. One monitor still glowed. A single document was open. A message, addressed to her. "Miss Marple, you were always expected. We never underestimated you. But there's something you must understand. The Emberglass affair was a curtain. Behind it lies the real stage. You've seen a pawn. Now find the bishop." R.B. She straightened slowly. Nash looked confused. "What does it mean?" She said nothing. She was remembering something else. Weeks earlier, after Rowena's escape, she had received that chessboard in the mail. A piece had been missing, the queen. But now she remembered something odd. Beside the board had been a small brass plaque. She had assumed it was just decorative, but the phrase had struck her as unusual. "The bishop guards the vault." Miss Marple left the ruined Heathmore Institute and returned to her home. She sat quietly in her chair, watching the fire. The world thought the mystery was over. The public had moved on, but she had found something darker, deeper. Rowena had been the tip of a blade. Someone else held the hilt, and she would find them. That night, a soft knock came at her door. It was a young courier, soaked from rain. "A package for you, miss." She thanked him and took it inside. Inside the box, a chess piece. The bishop, and beneath it, a folded newspaper clipping. "Former Grenton Mayor Eleanor Whitmore to speak at International Diplomatic Summit in Vienna." Miss Marple smiled faintly. So the game would continue. She stood, fetched her coat, and tucked the bishop into her pocket. Another case was waiting, and she, as always, was ready.